A lot of exciting things are happening for SpaceX, which recently completed stacking its soon-to-be orbital Starship. Elon Musk's SpaceX stacked a Starship prototype rocket on top of a super heavy rocket booster for the first time on Friday morning, looking at the scale of the combined nearly 400-foot-tall vehicle. In this video, we're going to find out how important and impactful the launch of a super heavy Starship would be for SpaceX. How would Starship's orbital flight change spaceflight forever? Let's find out. SpaceX is gearing up for the most ambitious test flight yet of its Starship Mars rocket. Last month, a Starship prototype aced a high-altitude test flight for the first time, soaring about 6.2 miles or 10 kilometers into the skies above SpaceX's Starbase site in South Texas, and then touching down safely back at the facility. It should be noted that 4 other Starship test vehicles had tried this unscrewed hop in the previous 5 months, but none of them managed to stick the landing. Even before achieving that milestone, however, SpaceX had started planning out the first Starship flight to Earth orbit. In March, for example, company founder and CEO Elon Musk tweeted that SpaceX was targeting July for that landmark trial, which will require both elements of the reusable Starship system, the 165-foot-tall upper stage spaceship called the Starship, and the huge first stage booster known as Super Heavy. Super Heavy was not involved in the 6.2-mile height flight. That May 5th jaunt employed just a prototype Starship upper stage, one outfitted with 3 of SpaceX's next-gen Raptor engines. The final Starship spacecraft will sport 6 Raptors, and Super Heavy about 30 of them, Musk said. In mid-May, we learned the details of the coming orbital test thanks to a document filed with the U.S. Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, that was first reported by The Verge. Starship prototypes stand at about 160 feet tall, or around the size of a 16-story building, and are built of stainless steel, representing the early version of the rocket that Musk unveiled in 2019. Musk, asked by CNBC what he thought of witnessing the milestone at the company's facility in Boca Chica, Texas, responded simply by saying that it was a dream come true. The rocket lifts off on top of a super heavy booster, which makes up the bottom half of the rocket, and stands at about 230 feet tall. Together, Starship and Super Heavy are nearly 400 feet tall when stacked for launch. SpaceX has conducted multiple short test flights of Starship prototypes over the last year, but reaching orbit represents the next stage in testing the rocket. The company in May revealed its plan for the first orbital flight, which would launch from the company's facility in Texas and aim to splash down off the coast of Hawaii. The company has been working rapidly to ready Starship and the Super Heavy booster for the orbital test flight, although local environmental review by the Federal Aviation Administration needs to be completed before the launch happens. Musk outlined 4, quote, significant items that SpaceX aims to complete over the next 2 weeks, preparing for Starship 20's launch. He said SpaceX needs to add, quote, the final heat shield tiles to the ship, adding thermal protection to the Raptor rocket engines in Booster 4, complete work on ground propellant storage tanks, and add a quick disconnect arm to the top of the recently built launch tower. The quick disconnect arm connects power and fuel lines to the rocket before launch. While SpaceX's fleet of Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets are partially reusable, the goal of Musk is to make Starship fully reusable, a rocket that is more akin to a commercial airplane, with short turnaround times between flights, such that the only major cost is fuel. One important piece of making Starship fully reusable is improving its durability to survive the intense processes of re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Small hexagonal heat shield tiles are SpaceX's answer to that problem, with the previously shiny Starship 20's rocket now covered in thousands of tiles. Musk noted that work on the tiles is about, quote, 98% done for Starship 20, adding, quote, the remaining tiles are unique shapes requiring machining. NASA has been paying close attention to Starship's development, especially as the U.S. Space Agency earlier this year awarded SpaceX a controversial $2.9 billion contract to deliver astronauts to the surface of the moon using rockets. Thomas Zurbuchen, NASA's top official for science missions, told CNBC that he continues to watch the progress on Starship. He further showed his support for SpaceX in a tweet that equally expressed his excitement for the new milestone the company achieved. Musk replied to Zurbuchen in another tweet, saying, quote, due to its size and ability to return science instruments even from deep space, Starship will enable a whole new class of science missions. The plan is that the Super Heavy Starship duo will lift off from Starbase, and the huge first stage booster will come down about 6 minutes later in the Gulf of Mexico, about 20 miles or 32 kilometers off the Texas coast. The upper stage will make its way to Earth orbit, ultimately returning for a soft splashdown about 62 miles or 100 kilometers off the northwest coast of the Hawaiian island of Kauai. Construction of the Super Heavy that will be involved in that flight is apparently well underway. On Tuesday, June 15th, for example, Musk tweeted a photo showing two pieces of the massive rocket about to come together. SpaceX has not announced a specific target date for the orbital test, but early July may well be off the table at this point. CNN Business reported on Wednesday, June 16th, that an environmental assessment of Starship's launch operations is currently being performed. CNN Business's Jackie Wattles also wrote, quote, "Depending on the outcome of that assessment, it may also require to go through a more detailed review, culminating in an updated environmental impact statement. Only after that process is complete can the Federal Aviation Administration move on to licensing a possible orbital Starship launch. Those reviews and approvals will not be done in time for an early July launch, according to a source similar with the licensing process. Simultaneously with this mission, unlike the flight test, the altitude is only about 10 kilometers above sea level. Ship 20 and Super Heavy Booster 4 will make the longest flight ever. It is expected to fly out of Earth's orbit, 3/4 the way along with the Earth. Because this is the longest flight, the flight time is the longest as well. This Starship has now been pushed into a new era, similar to how American railways opened the West to urban development some 150 years ago. Starship has yet to prove human viability, which is understandable considering SpaceX is still prototyping it. However, this orbital flight goes to show that Starship is ready to complete its first crewed orbital flight, with trips to the ISS and moon landing a step further. In addition, the Starship's first orbital test flight will have the task of providing a rich source of data for further trips in the future. SpaceX intends to collect as much data as possible during the flight to quantify entry dynamics and better understand what the vehicle experiences in a flight regime that is extremely difficult to accurately predict or replicate computationally. Starship is more than a revolutionary concept with the potential to change everything we know about spaceflight. The world will no longer have to choose between reusability and low cost, speed, and payload capacity, or even the distance and weight. If this technology and journey around the world proceed as planned, it would dramatically change the tables on spaceflight and the understanding of rocketry forever. To call Starship and the technology behind it revolutionary would be an understatement. The world will welcome a launch vehicle that has the possibility to reach the moon for the first time in decades, bring people to Mars for the first time ever, and serve so many other purposes. Let us know what you think about the Starship Super Heavy Booster and orbital flight by leaving a comment in the comment section below.